The snow had been falling since 4 in the morning. By 6:15, it had buried the flower beds outside the Hale Group's Midtown Tower, swallowed the yellow of the cabs idling on 52nd Street, and turned the city into something that looked less like New York and more like a memory of it, pale, muffled, drained of the usual noise. Flakes pressed flat against the lobby windows, and the marble floor near the revolving door was dark with melt water tracked in by early arrivals in their wool overcoats and leather ankle boots. Daniel Carter was not wearing wool. He was wearing the same navy fleece he wore every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, the one with the fraying zipper pull and the small bleach mark on the left cuff from a spill his daughter had warned him about. He came through the service entrance on the building's north side, the one that IT vendors used, the one without the heated vestibule, and he stood for a moment inside the stairwell doorway, with the cold still clinging to him, catching his breath, his right hand red from gripping his equipment bag through 2 blocks of open wind. His left hand held his phone. The screen showed a text message from 40 minutes ago. "Daddy, did you eat? There is still oatmeal in the pot. I left the lid on." Emma had sent it at 5:37, which meant she had been awake before 6. He had already replied, "Yes, baby, I ate. Go back to sleep," which was not entirely true. But the important part of the message was not the oatmeal. The important part was that she had thought to ask. He pocketed the phone and started up the stairs. The Hale Group occupied floors 49 through 53 of the Alderton Tower, a glass and steel structure completed in 2019 that had been photographed for architectural magazines and described in those magazines as a statement of vertical clarity. The people who worked inside it called it the fishbowl. Every wall on the executive floors was glass. Every meeting was visible from the corridor, and the building's central atrium ran all the way up through those 5 floors, so that a person standing on 49 could look up and see 50 through 53 stacked like transparent shelves above them. There was nowhere to be private. There was nowhere to disappear. This, insiders understood, was intentional. Victoria Hale had commissioned the interior design herself, and the message it sent to the 700 employees who passed through its turnstiles each morning was simple. "I can see all of you." Daniel had been working the building for 11 months. He was contracted through Meridian Tech Solutions, a mid-tier IT services firm that held the Hale Group's infrastructure support account. His title was Field Support Technician 2. His badge was gray, not white, which meant he could access server rooms and utility closets and cable runs and equipment cages, but could not access the executive suites on 52 or 53 without an escort. He was, in the organizational taxonomy of the building, a service provider. He came in, fixed what was broken, and left. The executive assistants knew his face, but not his name. The VP-level managers stepped around him in corridors the way people step around a piece of furniture that has always been in a particular place without hostility, without acknowledgement, without thought. He had learned, in 11 months, that this was not personal. It was structural. There was a layer of the building that registered his presence, and a larger layer that did not, and the border between the two was the white badge versus the gray one. On the 47th floor, which was the break room floor for the non-executive staff, there was a man named Preston Waverly, who worked in asset management, and who had never, in 11 months, passed Daniel in the kitchen without making some variation of the same comment. The comment was always delivered lightly, with a smile, in a tone that suggested it was a compliment. "You're the guy who can see all our passwords, right? You're the one who actually knows where all the bodies are buried." Daniel always smiled back. He never answered. He would pour his coffee, cap it, and return to whichever floor he was working. Preston was not a cruel person. He was simply a person who found the existence of the gray badge mildly exotic, in the way that people find mildly exotic anything they do not have to think about too carefully. There was a woman in the legal department named Christine Aldrich who had once, in front of a group of her colleagues, gestured at Daniel where he knelt beside an access panel in the corridor wall and said, in a voice not designed to carry but that carried anyway, "It guys always give me the creeps. They can see everything, and nobody ever checks on them." Daniel had continued working. He had not looked up. He had not looked up because he had been doing this long enough to know that the comment was not about him. It was about the category he occupied. The gray badge, the service tier, and engaging with a comment about a category never actually changes anyone's understanding of the category. You change the category by doing the work and leaving the evidence, or you change nothing at all. He reached the 49th floor and badged into the IT equipment room. The room was warm and humming, full of rack-mounted servers and patch panels, and the particular smell of electronics running at steady load. He set his bag down, unzipped it, and laid out his tools on the folding table the way he always did, organized, left to right, in the order he would likely need them. His phone buzzed again. This time it was from Margaret Osei, the facilities coordinator for floors 50 through 53. D. They need you on 52 as soon as possible. Projector, in the main boardroom, is down. They have a meeting at 9. He looked at the time. It was 7:48. He had a scheduled maintenance window on the network switches in the sub-basement, starting at 8. He texted back, "On my way in 10. Then he put his tools back in the bag, re-zipped it, and went up. The facts of Daniel Carter's life were simple. He was 36 years old. He had a daughter named Emma, who was 7, who had brown hair that was almost always in an imperfect ponytail because she did it herself each morning and refused help. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens, on the 3rd floor of a walk-up building whose radiators knocked loudly on cold nights, a sound Emma had decided was the building talking to itself, which Daniel thought was a better explanation than the real one. He drove a 2017 Honda Civic that needed new rear tires. He bought groceries on Sunday mornings when Emma was at her swim lesson at the community center 3 blocks away, which gave him exactly 1 hour and 20 minutes, which was usually enough. He cooked most of their meals from a rotation of 8 or 9 dishes that Emma had approved. She maintained strong opinions about pasta, and he read to her for 30 minutes each night before bed, even now that she could read perfectly well herself, because the 30 minutes was not about the reading. His wife's name had been Sarah. She had died in December 3 years ago, on a Tuesday, on the highway south of the city, in a storm that the forecast had underestimated. The truck that hit her car had been traveling too fast for the conditions, and the driver had admitted as much to the police. And this fact had not made anything simpler. Daniel did not often think about the driver. He thought, instead, about the Tuesday, about the fact that the last conversation he and Sarah had was about whether Emma needed new shoes, and that he had said probably not yet, and Sarah had said she does. Daniel, she's already got a blister, and he had said okay, this weekend, and that was the last exchange they had. He thought about the word probably, how many times he had used that word carelessly, as though certainty were a resource too valuable to spend on small questions. Sarah had been a second-grade teacher in Brooklyn, which meant she had spent her working days managing classrooms full of 7-year-olds, and which meant she had understood, at a granular level that Daniel had only begun to appreciate after she was gone, what a 7-year-old is actually like. Not the simplified version, the idea of a child as a smaller adult waiting to become a real one, but the specific texture of what 7 actually is, the mix of enormous confidence and enormous fragility, the opinions delivered with the certainty of settled law, the way a child of that age will sometimes stop in the middle of an ordinary activity and stare into the middle distance for a full 10 seconds for reasons they cannot explain, and then resume as if nothing happened, as if the machinery inside them needed a moment to recalibrate, and they saw no reason to be embarrassed about it. Emma was exactly like this. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of asking the kind of follow-up question that made clear she had been listening more carefully than you thought. She had Daniel's patience, which Sarah had always said with affection and a slight edge of exasperation, because patience in a 7-year-old looks a lot like stubbornness from the outside. He carried a photo of the two of them, Sarah and Emma, at the beach on a September weekend the year before the accident, in the interior pocket of his fleece. He had not put it there deliberately. It had been in his wallet, and then the wallet had worn through, and he had gotten a new one, and rather than moving the photo to the new wallet he had just kept it in the fleece, and the fleece had become the garment he wore most often in cold months, and now the photo was simply always near his left side when it was cold. which in New York meant most of the year. He had been, before Emma was born, a cybersecurity architect at a defense contractor in Northern Virginia. His clearances had been mid-level, but his skills had been well above that. He had a particular talent for system-level thinking, for seeing the surface a network presented to the world, and intuiting the vulnerabilities that lived just below it. He had been good at the work, and the work had been good to him. After Sarah died, he had moved back to New York, where her family lived. He had taken Emma out of daycare and enrolled her in a school 4 blocks from his mother-in-law's apartment so that his mother-in-law, Phyllis, could pick Emma up on the days he worked late. He had taken the first IT job he was offered, which was the Meridian contract, which was the gray badge, which was the 47th floor break room, and Preston Waverly and Christine Aldrich in the corridor, and a title that meant nothing about what he actually knew. Before Meridian, he had applied to 3 cybersecurity positions in the city. One of the rejections came with a note: "Candidate profile flagged due to reference issues." He had known what that meant. At the defense contractor, in his final month there, he had reported what he believed was a data handling irregularity to his supervisor. The supervisor had told him he was mistaken. Daniel had escalated. The supervisor had retired gracefully on a full pension 18 months later. Daniel's clearance application at the new firm had come back delayed, then denied. Then the offer had been withdrawn without explanation. He had spent the first 3 months after that grinding through a cycle that he recognized, intellectually, as grief's practical cousin, not the grief of loss but the grief of displacement, of being removed from the version of yourself you had been building for years. It was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It showed up as a flatness in the mornings, a tendency to eat whatever required the least preparation, a quiet that was not the peaceful kind. Emma, who was 4 at the time and had already lost her mother, had watched her father with the steady, unspeakable attention of a small person who understands that the adults around her are navigating something they have not fully explained, and who has decided to be patient about it. She had been the one who pulled him out of it in the end. Not with words she was for, but with the simple, inexorable gravity of needing things. She needed dinner at 6. She needed her hair done. She needed someone to sit with her through the thunderstorms she still found frightening. She needed the story at bedtime and the glass of water in the night, and the person at the school gate in the afternoon. And needing all of these things, she had needed him specifically, which meant he had to show up specifically, which was the most useful thing anyone had ever asked him to do. He had learned, from the escalation and the blacklist and the 12 months after, 2 things. The first was that institutions protect themselves first. The second was that if you are going to accuse anyone of anything, you need evidence so clean and so complete that the institution's self-interest and the truth become the same thing. He was still working on that second lesson. Or rather, he had been. Until November. Victoria Hale was 39 years old, and the biographical facts her communications team used were these: MBA from Wharton at 26, coup of a fintech startup at 29, CEO of Hale Group at 34, youngest female CEO of a Fortune 1000 tech company at the time of her appointment, Forbes 40 under 40. A TED Talk with 4 million views about organizational transparency, which was why all the walls were glass. The facts her communications team did not use were these. At 31, she had been the co-founder and operational lead of a data analytics company called Clearview Systems. Her business partner had been a man named Robert Fielding, whom she had known since graduate school, whom she trusted more than she had ever trusted any colleague before or since. Robert had been her mirror in the professional sense. She brought rigor, he brought instinct. She closed deals, he opened doors. She asked the hard questions. He persuaded people not to mind them. They had built Clearview together from a 2-person operation in a WeWork in Midtown into a company with 44 employees and 5 anchor clients, and a valuation that had been discussed, seriously, in the context of a Series B that would have positioned them for an IPO within 3 years. She had attended Robert's wedding. She had spoken at the reception and made everyone laugh and made Robert's new wife cry a little in the good way, and she had flown home the next morning and been back at her desk by 9 because there was a client call at 10 and she had not yet finished the slide deck. In the 6th year of Clearview's operation, Robert Fielding had begun selling their proprietary client data methodologies, behavioral models, engagement indices to a competing firm that he had, it emerged, been quietly helping to build for 2 years. By the time Victoria's audit team found the breach, Clearview had lost 3 of its 5 anchor clients. The company did not fail. She kept it alive through 2 brutal quarters by working 16-hour days and renegotiating every contract personally. But it was never the same, and she sold it at 40 cents on the dollar 18 months later and took 3 weeks off and then went to work on what would become the Hale Group, and she built it the only way she now knew how to build anything, with walls made of glass, and a rule she did not put in writing, but that every person she hired understood within their first month. Trust is a liability. Verify everything. What she had not told anyone, what she had told no one. Not the therapist she had seen for 6 months after the Clearview sale. Not her sister, not the executive coach she had worked with in the Hale Group's 2nd year, was that the worst part of what Robert had done was not the financial damage. The financial damage she had recovered from, the worst part was the gap it had created between the person she had been before and the person she became after. A gap she had walked across without fully understanding, until much later, that she had crossed it at all. She had become someone for whom the careful management of access was not merely a business practice but something closer to an instinct, the way a person who has broken a bone in the same place twice will guard that part of their body without deciding to. The glass walls were transparency as control. The visibility was not openness. It was a system. You could not do in this building what Robert had done at Clearview. Because there were no private rooms, no shadows, no closed doors behind which something could grow undiscovered for 2 years. Every meeting could be seen from the corridor. Every face was readable. Victoria had designed the building this way because she had decided that if she could not trust people the way she had once trusted Robert, she would at least make sure they could not hide. What she had not designed for was Daniel Carter. The boardroom on 52 was her central operational space, large, bright, enclosed on 3 sides by the building's exterior glass, and on the 4th side by a glass partition through which the corridor was visible. There was a long table of pale birchwood, 12 high-backed chairs, a ceiling-mounted projector, and, on the eastern wall, a 110-inch display that served as the primary screen for presentations and video calls. This morning, at 8:53, that projector was not functioning. Victoria stood at the head of the table. Around her were 7 people. 2 investment bankers from Callaway Mercer, who had flown in from Boston the previous afternoon. 3 of her own senior team, Thomas Abernathy from Corporate Development, Diane Whitmore from Legal, and the woman she trusted most in the building, Emily Rhodes, Director of Strategy, plus 2 junior analysts who were present to manage the materials. The materials were the issue. The meeting, scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp, concerned the final terms of a merger that had been in negotiation for 14 months. The target company, a data infrastructure firm based in Austin called Prism Technologies, had an enterprise value currently estimated at $4.3 billion. The transaction, if it closed, would be the largest acquisition in Hale Group's history. The documents on the table, and in the laptops of everyone in the room, contained information that was not yet public, and would not be public until the deal closed, and the disclosure of which, even partially, even accidentally, would constitute a securities violation and potentially unwind the deal entirely. The projector had died at 8:47. The junior analyst who had tried to restart it had spent 5 minutes doing nothing useful. At 8:52, Margaret had called Daniel. He arrived at 8:58. He came through the glass door with his equipment bag on his shoulder, snow still on the back of his collar from the wind outside. His right hand still reddish from the cold. He did not look around the room. He looked at the projector, then at the screen, then at the cable running between the conference laptop and the ceiling mount's input port. "Where's the main junction?" he said to the junior analyst, a young man named Kyle who looked relieved to have someone else take the problem. "Behind the credenza," Kyle said. Daniel set his bag down, moved the credenza 18 inches, crouched, and opened the junction panel. He could see the problem immediately. The main HDMI matrix switch had locked in a firmware loop, a not uncommon failure mode in this generation of hardware, when the ambient temperature dropped sharply and then rose, which it had done this morning as the building's HVAC compensated for the cold outside. A manual reset would clear it in 40 seconds. He reached in and began the reset sequence. The ceiling projector came on. The input signal cycled. The conference laptop on the table, the one connected to the system, lit the screen. It was not the screensaver. The laptop had not been locked. The screen showed a slide deck. The title page read, Prism Technologies Project Nightfall Final Term Sheet Confidential. Below that, a table of numbers. Daniel was looking at the junction panel. He was not looking at the screen, but he was positioned in such a way crouched at the credenza, angled slightly toward the room that from Victoria Hale's position at the head of the table, it appeared that his face was turned toward the projection. She was across the room in 3 steps. She closed the conference laptop with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. The room went quiet. "Peek again," she said, "and you're fired." The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. The glass walls of the room were the only witnesses required, and the corridor outside was empty. The 7 people around the table did not move. The 2 bankers from Boston looked at their hands. Thomas Abernathy looked at the table. Emily Rhodes, who was sitting closest to Daniel, looked at Victoria. Daniel stood up. He did not do it quickly, and he did not do it slowly. He stood up the way a person stands when they have finished a task, unhurried, complete. He turned to face Victoria Hale. His expression was the expression of a man who has heard something and is deciding what it means before he decides what to say about it. He said, "Ma'am." Then, after a pause that lasted long enough for everyone in the room to understand that the pause was deliberate, "If I wanted to take that data, this company would have been gone a long time ago." No one breathed. Victoria Hale looked at him. Not through him. At him. It was a different thing. Her eyes did the thing they always did when she was running a calculation, a slight narrowing, a stillness in the jaw, but this time the calculation was not immediately resolving itself. And that, more than anything, was unusual. "Everyone out," she said. The room emptied in under 90 seconds. The door closed. The glass partition showed the backs of 7 people moving down the corridor. Kyle the analyst already on his phone. The 2 bankers from Boston exchanging a glance that said, "Well, that's New York for you." Victoria Hale and Daniel Carter stood on opposite ends of the pale birch table. "Explain that," she said. He said, "I'd rather show you." The conversation that followed lasted 40 minutes and did not look, from the outside, like the kind of conversation it was. Daniel opened his laptop, his own, not the company's. A matte black machine with a sticker on the lid that had been placed there by Emma, and that said, in her handwriting, "Property of Emma's dad," and he walked Victoria Hale through what he had found over the preceding 6 weeks. It had started not with intention but with instinct. During a routine infrastructure audit in late November, he had noticed anomalies in the access logs for the secure document vault, the encrypted file repository that held the company's most sensitive transaction documents. The anomalies were subtle. 17 instances over a 30-day period of read access requests to a specific directory labeled CorpDev, Projects, Active, NF. The requests were made outside standard business hours. The credentials used were valid. The session durations were brief, between 4 and 7 minutes. The person whose credentials were used had no operational reason to be in that directory. The directory contained nothing labeled Prism or Nightfall from the outside. The internal file structure, however, was organized in a way that a person who knew the company's naming conventions would recognize immediately. Daniel explained what he had done next. He had not reported it. He said this without flinching, and he explained his reasoning without asking for her understanding. The last time he had reported a potential data irregularity to a chain of command, the chain had protected itself, and he had been removed. He was not going to repeat that pattern without being certain. So instead, he had done 3 things. First, He had set up a shadow monitoring layer on the directory, not altering the system, not triggering any alerts, simply creating a secondary log that wrote to an isolated file on his own equipment, invisible to the main system. Second, he had created a logical air gap around the actual documents. Without touching the files themselves, he had inserted a sandboxing parameter at the directory level that meant any read request beyond the title page level would execute in an isolated session, write nothing to buffer, and return a benign-looking timeout after 60 seconds. To anyone trying to read the actual content, it would look like a slow server. The real content was untouched. Third, he had created a file. He had called it Final Merger Terms NF Execution Ready. He had made it look, from its metadata and its thumbnail, exactly like the kind of document someone trying to steal this transaction would want. He had placed it one level above the actual documents, where a careful thief would find it without digging further. Inside it was not the merger terms. Inside it was a tracking package, a self-executing function that, when the file was fully opened, logged the opening device's network signature, IP, and timestamp, and also activated the document's embedded digital watermark, tying the file cryptographically to the first machine that opened it. He had set all of this up on a Tuesday. On the following Tuesday, at 12:47 in the morning, the file was opened. Victoria had not moved for the last 6 minutes of this explanation. She was standing to his left, close enough to see the screen, and her arms were crossed at the waist, not defensively, but in the posture of a person holding their own stillness. "Show me the opening log," she said. He showed her. She looked at the device signature. She looked at it for a long time. She said, "That's an internal device." "Yes, that network signature." She stopped. She began again. "That's an executive tier machine." "Yes." She looked away from the screen. She looked at the glass wall of the room, at the corridor beyond it, at the ordinary Tuesday morning motion of people in the building going to their desks and making their coffee and beginning their work. She looked at all of it, and she said nothing. Daniel waited. When she looked back at him, her face had settled into something he had not seen there before. It was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was a kind of recognizing the expression of a person who has felt a specific shape in the dark and knows, before they turn the light on, exactly what it is. "How certain are you?" she said. "The device signature is unique. There's no second instance of that signature in the building. The timestamp corresponds to a period when the building's access logs show only 4 badge swipes. 3 of those are security rotation. The 4th is a swipe from the executive garage at 12:31 a.m., 17 minutes before the file was opened." She did not ask him whose badge. She already knew whose badge. Emily Rhodes had a garage pass and a habit of working late. Everyone knew it. It was one of the things Victoria had always considered a mark in Emily's favor. The dedication, the willingness to be in the building at hours when no one was watching. That was the point, of course. That was always the point. Emily Rhodes had been at the Hale Group for 6 years. She had come from a strategy consulting firm in Chicago, had been hired initially as a director-level analyst, and had risen to her current role, Director of Strategy, reporting directly to Victoria in year 4. She was 41, technically precise, consistently calm under pressure, and possessed of a quality that Victoria had always valued above most others in the people around her. She asked the right questions. She sat across from Victoria now in the same boardroom. But the configuration was different. The bankers from Boston had been rescheduled. Thomas Abernathy was present, as was Diane Whitmore from legal, as was a man named Robert Krause from the firm's outside counsel. Daniel sat at the far end of the table. He had not been introduced by title. He had been introduced as the person who prepared the materials they were about to review. Emily did not know what the meeting was about. She had been called in from her office 15 minutes ago. She sat with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and the expression of a person waiting for information before deciding what to do with it. Victoria set 3 printed pages on the table and slid them to Emily. "These are yours," she said. Emily looked at the pages. They were printouts from the monitoring log, with annotations. Her name was not on them, but the device signature was, and the timestamp was, and the badge entry log was, and across the top of the first page Daniel had written, in clean block letters, Device UID 7743. X opened. Final merger terms NF execution ready. 12:47 3 seconds ochtends, December 11. Emily looked at the pages for a long time. This is a systems error, she said. My machine may have auto-synced. It's not a sync event, Daniel said. He said it without heat. Sync events don't produce a full open signature. This is a manual open. 64 seconds of active session. Emily turned to look at him for the first time. She had not looked at him once since the meeting began. Her expression was the expression of a person who has just noticed that the furniture has spoken. Who is this? She said. The person who caught you, Victoria said. The room was very quiet after that. Outside, the snow had slowed to occasional flurries, and the light through the glass was flat and gray and clean. Emily set down her pen. She picked it up again. She set it down. There's no proof of intent, she said. I may have opened a file by mistake. The fact that I accessed a directory 17 times, Daniel said, that I may have accessed a directory on multiple occasions is not evidence of anything except that I was doing research related to my role. Emily, Victoria said. Emily looked at her. The file you opened is a trap. The actual documents have been sandboxed since November. Everything you've been reading for 6 weeks is a version of the document I allowed you to see. She paused. You haven't read the real terms. You've been reading a controlled draft with 3 material differences from the actual agreement. If you've shared what you read with anyone, they have the wrong numbers. This was the detail that did it. Emily had not known this. The fact that she had not known this, the fact that she had been operating on what she believed was accurate intelligence and had been working with false information, showed in her face before she could prevent it, a fraction of a second of recalibration, a flicker of the machinery behind the professional stillness. Victoria saw it. Emily saw Victoria see it. The pen was set down a final time. You never trusted me, Emily said. Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of someone holding a weight, not of someone set free of one. I trusted you for 6 years, Victoria said. That part I cannot explain. Then why? I don't know yet who you were sharing it with. I don't know what you were promised. I don't know how long before November this started. She looked at Robert Krause. Those are questions for a different room. Diane Whitmore slid a document across the table. It was a notice of suspension pending investigation. Emily looked at it. She did not pick it up. Before you destroy someone, Daniel said, quietly, from the end of the table, be certain. It was the second time he had spoken in the meeting. The room waited. He had said it without looking at Emily, and without looking at Victoria. He said it the way a person says something they have learned by being on the other side of it. Emily stood. She took the document from the table. She left the room without speaking again, and the glass door closed behind her. And through the glass wall the corridor received her, and she walked out of the frame of it and was gone. The building's HVAC had compensated fully by late morning, and the 52nd floor was warm. Outside, the snow had stopped. The city was doing its particular post-storm thing the first hour of it, before the plowing and the salting fully engaged, where everything was briefly, improbably clean. The parked cars along 52nd were smooth white shapes, and the scaffolding on the building across the street held snow along every crossbar like a series of narrow shelves, and a delivery man pushing a dolly through the slush left a dark track behind him that closed slowly, like a sentence being erased. Victoria Hale was standing at the east-facing glass with a cup of coffee. She had not been standing there long. Daniel was packing his equipment bag at the table, which took approximately 90 seconds because he was a person who organized things in the order he would need them, and so unpacking and repacking were mirror operations. The room had the particular silence of a space in which something significant has recently happened. Not a tense silence, the tension had resolved itself in the corridor. When Emily walked out, this was the silence after. The silence that belongs to the people left in a room once the event has passed through it. It was a silence both of them were comfortable inside of. Neither of them tried to fill it. "The sandbox," she said, without turning around. "The trap file. The air gap. You did all of that on your own time." "On my lunch breaks," he said. "And one Saturday. You're contracted to Meridian. I'm contracted to Meridian for infrastructure maintenance." "What I did was infrastructure maintenance." She turned from the window. "That's a liberal interpretation. It's the correct one." She was quiet for a moment. The coffee cup was held in both hands, the way people hold coffee cups when they are thinking, and the coffee has stopped being the point. She looked at him with an expression he could not fully read, which was unusual. He was good at reading rooms, good at the small cues of posture and eye movement that tell you whether a situation is safe or not safe, which was a skill you developed when you spent your working days moving through environments where you were mostly invisible and therefore had to navigate by indirect information. But Victoria Hale gave fewer of those cues than most people. She had spent years training herself out of them. "Why didn't you tell me in November?" she said. "I've been on the wrong side of that question before." He closed the equipment bag and straightened. "I needed to be certain. Not mostly certain. Certain. And if she had been innocent, then I would have disassembled the trap, removed the monitoring layer, and she'd never have known it was there. You had 17 access events. You waited 6 weeks after the first one. The first 14 could have been explained by legitimate research. The operational tempo of the project picked up in November. Anyone in a strategy role might have been reviewing documents in that directory for context. I needed an event that couldn't be explained that way. The trap file gave me that." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Not with the calculating stillness from this morning that had resolved into something else, something less managed and more real. She looked at him the way people look when they are revising an assessment they had made without sufficient information, and are honest enough with themselves to acknowledge that that is what they are doing. "She called you a systems error," she said. "I know. That bothered you." "Not especially," he said. And then, more honestly, "No." She almost asked him how that was possible. But she stopped herself, because she already understood. A person who has been invisible long enough stops expecting to be seen in every given moment. That did not mean the invisibility was acceptable. It meant he had learned to carry it without letting it slow him down. These were different things. "You're not just an IT tech," she said. "No," he said. "I'm not." "What are you?" He considered this. Outside, 49 floors below, a plow was making its first pass along 52nd Street, pushing the clean white snow into a gray ridge along the curb, and the sound of it reached the glass as a faint, regular scraping. He watched it for a moment. He thought about how to answer a question that had a short answer and a long one, and that the short one was probably more useful. "Right now I'm a guy who needs to get to a maintenance window in the sub-basement," he said. "The network switches have been waiting since 8. Victoria almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the near approach of one, the moment before a thing becomes itself. She set the coffee cup on the table. "Go do your switches," she said. "Then come back up at 3. "Why?" "Because I want to know the rest of it." He came back at 3. She had cleared her afternoon, which he learned from Margaret, who told him with an expression that suggested this was unprecedented, and that he should understand the full weight of it, which he did. He sat across from Victoria, in the small conference room, adjacent to her office. Not the boardroom, not the glass-walled theater of the morning, but a room with a single window, and 2 chairs, and a coffee machine on the credenza that no one had turned on. She turned it on. While it ran through its cycle, she stood at the window with her back to him, looking at the street below, and he sat quietly and waited. He was good at waiting in rooms. He had spent 11 months being good at it. When the coffee was ready, she filled both cups without asking, and set one in front of him and sat down. And there was something in that small gesture, the assumption that he drank coffee, the not asking that told him the dynamic of the room had shifted from this morning's. This morning she had been running calculations. Now, she was in a different mode. Less managing, more present. He told her the rest of it. The Virginia job. The escalation. The supervisor, and the pension, and the clearance denial. The 3 applications, and the reference flag, the gray badge, and the 11 months in the building, and what he had seen from the service tier of the company she ran, not said with resentment, not as a performance of injury, but as the plain sequence of events that had led him here, to this chair, to this particular cup of coffee. She listened in the way that is different from waiting for a turn to speak, actually listening, with her attention organized toward him rather than toward what she was going to say next. She did not interrupt. She did not take notes. She held her coffee cup in both hands and watched his face while he spoke, and her expression did the thing his mother-in-law's expression did when she listened to someone seriously, which was to go very still. Not blank, but inhabited a focused, receiving stillness. When he finished, she said, "Christine Aldrich." He looked at her. "I know about what she said in the corridor," she said. "October, wasn't it? The access panel, on 48. He was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. "That shouldn't have happened in my building." "It happens everywhere," he said. "That's not an excuse." "No," he said. "It isn't." She set down her cup. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is uncomfortable. All right. Did the way this building treated you, the gray badge, the invisibility, the Christine Aldrich incident, did any of it affect the quality of the work you did?" He considered the question. He took it seriously, which he could see she appreciated. "No," he said finally. "But not because I'm particularly virtuous. Because the work is the work. The switch either functions or it doesn't. The log entry either exists or it doesn't. I don't know how to do the work badly and still call it work." He paused. "The invisibility made it easier to do certain things, if I'm being precise. Nobody watches the IT guy closely. That's what let me build the monitor layer without anyone noticing. The thing that was meant to marginalize you became your operational advantage." Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the single window, the afternoon had gone that particular winter blue, not dark yet, but the light lowered and thickened. The sky, the color of something that has been through a lot. He thought about Emma, who would be finishing after school at 4:30, and his mother-in-law who would be picking her up, and the conversation he would have with Emma tonight at bedtime, where she would ask how his day was. And he would have to decide how much of this was a story for a 7-year-old, and how much of it he would carry home quietly and set down somewhere she wouldn't find it. "What do you want?" Victoria said. "What do you mean?" "From this. From today. From the work you did. What do you want?" He thought about it honestly, which is to say he did not answer immediately. He thought about the right words versus the easy ones. He thought about the word probably again, as he sometimes did when he was being asked a question that required specificity. "I want Emma to be able to go to the school she's been accepted to in the fall," he said. "It's a good school. It has a science program. She keeps talking about the telescope." He paused. "I want to be doing work that uses what I actually know, and I want to be in a building where I'm not invisible, unless something is broken." Victoria nodded slowly. "The school," she said. "What does it cost?" "That's not what I'm asking for." "I know it isn't." She looked at him steadily. "I'm asking because I want to know the number." He told her the number. She nodded again. "All right," she said. "All right, what?" "All right, give me 2 weeks." He looked at her. "I'm not offering you a job right now," she said. "Because you'd be right to be suspicious of a job offered in a moment of gratitude. And I am not an impulsive person. What I'm telling you is that Thomas Abernathy's team is going to need a new security architecture lead for the Prism integration. The due diligence process for that is 8 weeks. I want you involved in it. If that goes the way I think it will, we'll have a different conversation at the end of it." "About what?" "About the gray badge." He looked at the coffee machine on the credenza. Then he looked back at her. "I don't need you to fix my career," he said. It was not said with resentment. It was said with precision. "I need the work to be evaluated on what it is. That's what I'm describing," she said. He considered this. He thought about the access panel on 48 and Christine Aldrich's voice. He thought about Preston Waverly and the passwords comment and the 11 months of being a category instead of a person. He thought about the network switches in the sub-basement that he had spent the morning resetting with the same attention he gave every task, regardless of whether anyone was watching. He thought about the word probably. About the things you say carefully, and the things you say carelessly, and the difference, which you only really understand after you have paid the price of the difference. He thought about Robert Fielding, whom he had never met, who had done to Victoria Hale what his old supervisor had done to him, more or less had used trust as a door, and walked through it and closed it on the way out. He thought about what it would mean to be the person who demonstrated, in a building full of glass, that visibility was not the same as understanding, that you could watch every room and still miss the thing that mattered. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she said. He left the building at 5:20. The streets were quieter than morning, the worst of the commuter rush still 20 minutes away. The afternoon light almost gone. The sky a deep steel blue above the buildings. The snow on the sidewalks had been piled and salted into a coarse gray slush, and he walked through it without minding. On the subway platform at 53rd Street, he checked his phone. There was a text from Emma, sent at 4:33. Grandma Phyllis made her soup. She says you have to eat it all, or she'll be sad. I told her you always eat all the soup, so she doesn't need to worry. Did you have a good day? He stood on the platform with the warm, dirty wind of an incoming train beginning to push through the tunnel, and he read the message twice. He typed back, "Yeah, baby, pretty good day, actually." He thought about that for a moment. Then he added, "Tell Grandma Phyllis I'll eat all the soup." The train arrived. He got on. He held the overhead bar and felt the train accelerate, and thought about the telescope in the science program brochure, an 8-inch reflector on a motorized mount, good enough for the rings of Saturn on a clear night, good enough for the moons of Jupiter, good enough for a 7-year-old with a ponytail. She made herself and strong opinions about pasta, to point at the sky, and see that the sky was full of things. He thought about Victoria Hale at the window this morning before everything broke open, standing with her arms crossed, watching the snow with the expression of a person who had built herself a glass house for reasons that made sense, and was only now beginning to understand that she could not live in it alone. He did not think about Emily Rhodes with any satisfaction. He had been on the wrong side of an accusation, and he knew what that felt like, and he had made certain the word he had used all through November and December, the word he had held onto like a tool that only works when it is used correctly, before he moved. He did not know yet what Emily had been promised, or what she had been afraid of. Those were questions for a different room, as Victoria had said. He was not in that room. He was on a train to Queens, going home to eat soup. The Prism Technologies due diligence closed on a Thursday in late February. Daniel submitted his security assessment, a 47-page document covering authentication architecture, data handling protocols, and a 3-phase integration roadmap on the Tuesday before. He submitted it through Meridian's project portal, as he was still formally a Meridian contractor, and he submitted it in the same format he would have submitted any other piece of work, clearly organized, fully sourced, without embellishment. Thomas Abernathy called him on Wednesday morning. "I've read this 3 times, Thomas said. "Is there something unclear?" Daniel said. "Nothing's unclear," Thomas said. "That's what I'm calling about." The meeting with Victoria happened on Thursday afternoon, after the due diligence close, in the small conference room with the single window. This time the coffee machine was on. She poured 2 cups without asking, and set one in front of him before she sat down. The conversation was 40 minutes long. He came out of it with a signed offer letter and a start date of March 15th, which gave him 3 weeks to close out the Meridian contract properly and without burning anyone, which he considered important. His new title was Head of Security Architecture. His new badge would be white. He called his mother-in-law from the sidewalk outside the building. "How was your day?" she asked, which was how she always answered, because she had been asking people how their days were for 64 years, and saw no reason to stop now. "Good," he said. "Really good. Are you coming for dinner? I made more soup." "I'll be there by 6:30, he said. That night, after the soup, after Emma's bath, after the 30 minutes of reading, they were on the 3rd book of a series about a girl who builds robots, which Emma had started describing to her classmates in enough detail that 2 of them had asked their parents for the first book after Emma's eyes closed and her breathing went long and even. Daniel sat in the kitchen with the lights low and a cup of tea going cold in his hands. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it was always quiet after Emma fell asleep. The radiators knocking, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional sound of the street below a car, a voice, the Doppler shift of a bus going past. He had learned, in the 3 years since Sarah died, to live inside this quiet without needing to fill it. The quiet was not empty. It was full of ordinary things. Emma's shoes by the door, the 2 drawings held to the refrigerator by magnets, the small stack of library books on the counter, with a sticky note from the school librarian reminding him the middle one was due Thursday. He thought about the word certain, about the patience it required, about how patience is not the same as passivity, how you can be still on the outside and working on the inside, how you can accept what is temporary without letting it become permanent, how you can carry a thing a long time without becoming the thing you're carrying. He had carried the gray badge and the access panel in Christine Aldrich's voice and Preston Waverly's smile for 11 months, and none of it had made him smaller. He knew this not because he was particularly confident. Confidence had never been the point, but because the switches still worked, and the logs were still clean, and the trap file had done exactly what it was designed to do, and those things were true regardless of what anyone in the building had believed about the gray badge. He thought about Victoria Hale at the window after the meeting. Before he went down to the sub-basement standing with both hands around her cup. The snow stopped outside, the city beginning its slow mechanical re-emergence from the white. He thought about what it must be like to build a house of glass around yourself, in the belief that visibility was the same as safety, and then to discover that the thing you needed had been in the building the whole time, unregistered, unremarked, resetting switches in a room no one watched. He thought about Emily Rhodes. He did not think about her with anger, and he did not think about her with satisfaction. He thought about her the way he thought about the driver of the truck on the December highway, as someone whose choices had created damage, as someone whose reasons he did not fully know, as someone for whom he had no particular feeling beyond a steady wish that the legal process would be thorough and accurate and fair, which was not mercy, exactly, but was the closest he had to offer. He thought about a girl and a telescope and the rings of Saturn. He thought about March 15th, about walking through the lobby with a white badge, about introducing himself to Thomas Abernathy's team not as the IT guy, not as the gray badge, not as the category, but as himself, as Daniel Carter, head of security architecture, here to do the work. He thought about how he would explain the job change to Emma. She would want to know if his new office had a window. He was fairly sure it did. She would want to know if he would still be home by 6. He would be. She would want to know if the people there were nice, and he would say, "Some of them are getting there." And Emma would nod as though this was exactly the answer she had expected, and move on to asking about dinner. He finished his tea and washed the cup and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Outside, the February cold had settled over the city like a second city. Cold and clear, and full of ordinary stars.